Good afternoon. I'm Jordan Roth, and this is episode 44 of DALLÄSTHETIC podcast. Sitting with me today is my friend and curator, Consuelo Gutierrez. Welcome, Consuelo.
Hi. Thank you for having me.
So you have a show that has come together called On the Surface at the McKinney Avenue, well, the MAC. It used to be on McKinney Avenue
Yeah.
Contemporary. But yeah.
It's hard not to say.
It's hard not to say the whole
Yeah,
title.
yeah.
At the MAC in the Cedars, and it's a wonderful show. So we're gonna talk a good bit about that.
Okay.
But before we do, tell me, like, what background do you have in art?
My background in art is, well, I went to school for art history, but initially I pursued a career in graphic design. But I really wanted to get back to doing, art history types of things, and there's certain routes that you can take, and I feel like now I've taken all of them.
Oh, cool.
So, or at least quite a few of them. It's but yeah, I went back to school and got that next degree, and decided to kind of meld my interests in design and art and technology. So I started off as more of like a digital curator rather than a physical one. So so it was mainly bringing collections online, working with museums. So that's
nice.
where my background is mainly working with museums. So but yeah, now I'm trying out the physical curating.
So this is your first endeavor curating?
Yes,
Oh, wow.
it is. I've had some experience with a few little minor things here and there, but I was mainly a behind the scenes kind of person working in collections management departments at museums. And working with arts organizations and libraries and archives and things like that. So yeah, I've been behind the scenes, seeing what the curators are doing, and having such a respect for that profession that I've thought, okay, I got to earn my stripes first, before I do that, even though nowadays everybody's a curator, but
Right. And you can curate anything.
Yes, apparently now you can curate anything.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, it's been really fun, and a big, learning opportunity. But yeah, I felt like I was building up towards that, and once I set my mind to it, then I was like, okay, it's time. I feel like it's time to do this.
So what was the impetus? What was there a leap that you took that got you to that point?
Yeah, I mean, I think definitely being in the Cedars, I was working there and at the Cedars Union, and seeing a lot of artists, talking to them, understanding where they're coming from, and meeting people like you, in the Cedars, who are doing some really amazing things, and just getting out there and taking risks and giving people opportunities that, maybe previously didn't have a forum or a platform or a space. And so I think that was what really led me to say, okay, yeah, I'm working at the Cedars Union. I was giving that space, or working to help give those spaces to emerging local artists. And so that was sort of in the back of my head about, what about local emerging curators and people doing other things like that. You don't have to be an artist. So that was definitely something that I was behind as a message while I was in at the Cedars Union, is that the arts community is more than artists. It's
Right.
everybody else too.
Yeah.
That's included, that help with it all.
Completely. And so it's all Texas artists?
Yes, they're all Texas artists, and they're amazing artists. So I didn't want to bill it as a female Texas artist,
Right.
but so I've been not really saying that.
Yeah.
But yeah, because they can totally stand on their own as
sure.
artists, and but yeah, some of them have had shows all over the world, and they just weren't names that people in Dallas were familiar with. Two of them are artists in Dallas. Three of them are in Houston, and one's in Galveston.
Okay.
And so that just kind of came from my living in Houston for a little while working at the Manil Collection. And when I came back to Dallas, which is where I'm from, I was like, wow, I saw some really great art there. I want to keep going back, and seeing some great art here and not really seeing too much of, opportunities for these artists so far. So I thought, well, why don't we like bring this to the MAC and see how it goes, because I really wanted to. I think talking to Rachel Rogerson at the MAC, she was hoping that we could like. When I say we, I just mean the art community can like bring this sort of like corridor of art that goes up and down Texas and all around. But
there's great interplay between all of the artists, and Houston and Dallas seem to have very disparate art economies, and it's nice to see interplay there.
Yeah.
What are some themes that are explored in the show?
Some of the themes are like remnants and reproduction, and just how the artists are reacting to their environments. So that is like what I was starting to see, and some of that also is just like talking about like the surface of things, and even those things being their bodies.
Yeah.
So that's where a lot of those themes of hair were coming in, and clothing. So whether they're putting things on or it's their hair and how they're arranging it, and just the surface of the ocean, or to anything really, and then reproducing all of these images and what's left behind. And so I could see the artists were working through something, and over and over and over again. So some of them were doing it literally or just mentally, but so that was something that I was seeing throughout a lot of these artists' work, and what made me put them together.
That makes perfect sense too. Looking back at the exhibition. Tell me about some of the artists in the show.
Like I mentioned, two of the artists are from Dallas. One is Saba Beeger. She's has a lot of, she has some experience, not experience, but like her work previously in the past has been maybe a little bit more traditional. And so now she's kind of reemerging again with a whole new type of work. And it's all porcelain. And so she's like working through that, and addressing ecological concerns that she feels like we're all having, and that she's been really working through herself, and just from a cultural aspect, not just a U.S. or Western one, but also an Eastern one. And so she like in her culture, she's has a Pakistani American background, and so where in Pakistan, apparently it's you shouldn't be into sci-fi. So it's like, so for her to be creating these sort of like otherworldly environments is kind of like, ooh, that's kind of like sci-fi, and so she's kind of like pushing those cultural boundaries that she kind of grew up with. Maybe.
And that was a thought that I had, not that women shouldn't do sci-fi,
right?
But because
even here,
it's a unique perspective, and it's a different type of sci-fi than what you would normally think of. It's undersea.
Yeah, right. Yeah, and so, and I think with her work, she's like really also like really pushing the materials. So that's like another theme, is that a lot of these artists are really kind of like doing interesting things with the materials that they're working with. And so she's really, kind of like playing with that clay body that she has learned to love so much. And so she's just kind of obsessing over it right now. So it's really fun to see that in her work. But I decided to include some of her older ones too, because it just felt like it went with everything else as well. And, and then the other Dallas artist is Sarah Cardona. And her work is so interesting too, because she's doing it's like a hybrid form of like, is it digital, painting? Is it, an analog approach to digital things? Like, it's really interesting. It's like cut and paste and collage. But when...
And sculptural in a
Yeah,
way, too.
yeah. So she's like, printing things on like Tyvek type material. And so when you look at it at first, like, especially when she's, bringing it in and it's like flat. And if you're not looking and you look back, and then she's got it like on the wall installed, and it's sort of like going back and forth and undulating and weaving and moving, and all she's done, is really just kind of like played with how she's installing it on the wall or whatever. And so she's done that with, a lot of the other pieces that are in her work in the show.
Her work is wild. I did a studio visit maybe a year and a half ago, and one thing that I remember is she had a series of photographs that were just collages made from the skin of people in photographs, which I think one of those is included. And then another was all of the clothing.
Yeah.
and it was such an interesting way to dissect the photography that she was finding.
Yeah, it almost feels like she's some kind of forensic anthropologist,
Totally,
like she's just, like obsessing over these different qualities of skin or hair even. So
I saw a hair one too. So cool.
Yeah,
so cool.
But they're coming out of like magazines and all the different skin tones, and so when she's arranged them in some of those pieces in the show, it's just like like this catalog.
Yeah,
so,
and they're beautiful.
Yeah, they're really great what she's done with them. So and then some of the other ones included in the show are Rabea Bain, and she's a Houston artist. And again, she's really obsessed over, the hair. And so she's, drawing it. And I know that she's been doing that for years and years, like since adolescence. And so she's been drawing hair. And so now she's like really using that as a way to kind of address those, like the hair politics and how it works with self-identity. And so her work is like, going through that, like just such meticulous, detailed drawings, and then she's reproducing them in prints. And so that's really cool. But yeah, and then Sofia Longoria, she is from Galveston, and she's doing, her pieces are like shirts that she's taking lyrics from some of her favorite songs when she was, kind of a young adult or teenager. And her video piece in particular is kind of like taking on that sort of like cultural reference of Star Wars. And so she's like, but she's also working through, and exploring ideas of like mental health and, addiction and things like that. And so that was also kind of being reflected in other pieces from some of the other artists, like Rabea's, where she's got like lyrics from a song on, a notebook. And so it's just, I think everybody's sort of like surveying the culture around them and kind of picking it up and like rearranging and putting it, back together in new ways. And just like Predica's work, she's, again, an artist from Houston. And she's taking saris, because she's an Indian American, and so she's like taking saris and ripping them up and putting them back together again. And then she has a video piece where she's putting some pigment on her, and I think she's also like working through those like self-identity kind of things, issues, and how she sort of inherited and what she should look like or what she should be putting on her body, and how that's supposed to represent who she is. And so she's working through that, and she's working, through other issues of just, culture and race and sexuality. And so is Lovey Olivia, who's another artist from Houston in the show. And hers are even kind of take another route where they're historical references. So there's a little bit of that in the show, but some of her other works that she's included in other shows have a lot more to do with that. But yeah, she's got a lot of like